Hello, guys. Welcome back to the All Things New Kingdom Vision podcast. Well, it's the Kingdom Vision podcast, but we're talking about the All Things New devotion series. We are coming up on the halfway mark, and this week was a great week. Actually, I loved this week, and this week is going to speak into next week quite a bit. Um, this week we talked about how, excuse me, how God comes in and takes these stony hearts of just rebellion and disrespect that we have, and he takes those fleshly heart or those stony hearts, and he puts in, he says, a heart of flesh, and it's beating and it's alive, and he puts his spirit in us. And we what we talked about over several of the days this week, we were in Ezekiel 36, we were in Psalm 51, I believe, and then Psalm 103 particularly, about how God doesn't just correct our behavior. Walking with Jesus and being a follower of Jesus, guys, it's not just about behavior modification. We're not just here to comply. It's kind of like when you're raising your kids. You want them to comply. You want them to do what you ask them to do, but you don't necessarily just want compliance. You want their heart. You want to obey. You want them to obey out of love and out of what's the word I'm looking for? Just responsibility, wanting to do what's right. There's a word I can't call to mind. But in our writings this week, we talked about how Israel was brought back. He was doing more than just bringing them back to the land. We can get focused on that. That was happening. He was bringing them out of exile, but that wasn't all that he wanted. He wasn't just wanting them to have better behavior and be more religious. He wanted new people. So we've been studying. We kind of hit it a little bit ago, but I was preaching this a couple weeks ago on Daniel chapter 1, where they were taken into Babylon, and Babylon didn't just want to have conquest, didn't just want to take them over. They wanted to make new people out of them. They wanted them to worship Baal and wanted to worship their gods in Babylon there. And so we get down into this, and God, when he brings them back, he's like, no, I want to put my spirit in you. I want to put a new heart in you and make you new, which fast forwards us into the New Testament, where God says that we are new creatures. For anybody who follows Christ, we are new creatures. Old has passed away. We are remade new. And that's part of it. He takes that old dead heart out and he puts a heart of flesh in. And we're really good as humans about coming up with the right rules, making sure that we're following all the right things. And in fact, we're just kind of bent on managing those outward symptoms, those things that outwardly show. Sometimes people actually think we're more, righteous or spiritual than we are. But sometimes we honestly believe that brings inner change. And God tells us in these passages like that, no, that's not how this works. The heart doesn't change from the inside or from the outside in. It changes from the inside out. Now, change on the outside is important, and getting into habits of discipline and things like that. But if they don't grow out of a renewed heart, they just become legalism. If you don't believe me, study the Pharisees and look how they did it. They had all the rules and they kept them to the letter, but they didn't have the heart, and they were far from God and far from Jesus when he came, and didn't even recognize him. And then we moved this week over into Luke, where Jesus comes and he finds Zacchaeus, and who's looking, and Zacchaeus was a tax collector, chief tax collector, likely hated by everybody, and kind of like us, we don't like the tax man either. But we see Jesus taking a pause and seeing Zacchaeus for what he was and not the category that he was in. And what he was a guy who was looking and searching. How do we know that? Because he climbed a tree. Because he was short of stature, he was a little guy. He climbed the tree so he could see Jesus. He was looking and searching. I wonder how many people we pass in our day, how many people that we come across in a normal day, a normal week, at work, at church, even in our families, that are, whether they realize it or not, they're looking for Jesus. They're looking for something that God has for them that only God can provide. And Jesus saw him, which is way more important than Zacchaeus seeing Jesus. The fact of the matter that Jesus stopped, and then he said this thing that would have set everybody on their ear: I'm going to come to your house. Um, People would have thought, whoa, what do you mean you're going to go to this tax collector's house? That's just not something we do. God didn't expect Zacchaeus to change who he was, to be something different before he came to him. And I think a lot of times we ask people to be something different. We ask people to change the way that they are on the outside before we allow them the time to have God change them on the inside. And that's just not um, the example that Jesus was setting for us this week. And truly, when that heart changes, it will translate into a translated or a transformed life with transformed action and with transformed behavior. But it's the heart that's the target. And certainly we want to call people to accountability who are following Jesus. We want each to be called to accountability ourselves when we're in sin and those sorts of things. But we can't just stop with, hey, you have this behavior, I have this behavior. We need to be asking the question, what's going on underneath? When we talked on this last Sunday or about Babylon, and we were talking about how we are being formed by the world that's around us. We're being formed by something, and oftentimes we're being formed by the world around us and not by the scriptures and prayer and spiritual disciplines and spiritual family and community. We're simply being discipled by the world, and we are being made into a kind of person and into people, whether we like it or not. And so the question then becomes, is Babylon training us, or is Jesus training us through his word, through his spirit, through prayer, and through his people? We saw in the first kind of part of the week that we are in desperate need of a new heart. We're in desperate need of God to renew us from the inside out. And then we kind of tailored off into the week and saw how God, through Jesus, actually fulfills the promise that he made to Israel. So I'm going to bring you back, yes, to the land, but I'm going to bring you back as my people. And I'm going to put my heart, my spirit in you. I'm going to give you a new heart, put my spirit in you. I'll be your God. You'll be my people. And the scriptures tell us that through faith in Christ, you and I are Israel as well. Now I don't want to get off into replacement theology and all that, but we are children of Abraham by faith, not by lineage and not by law, but by faith through Christ. And so that promise of this renewal we see in the New Testament comes to you and me. And Jesus fulfilled that. And in Acts 2, when the Spirit falls, we get kind of the full Monty that we can have of that here. And there's even more coming when he comes back, in terms, not in terms of quantity of the Spirit, but in the absence of all of the trappings that this world has to bring. He's going to make things right. That's why this thing's called All Things New. He's going to set things right. And so as we transition from this week into this next week, we're going to be talking about Daniel and kingdoms and worldly power and empire and how that balances out. This is a good time to talk about it. There's a lot of stuff going on in the news, some crazy stuff, some ridiculous stuff. We're coming up on a big election year, so there's a lot of political talk. I'm hoping that you can really tune your heart, look in the mirror of God's word, and see, where are we being formed by what's around us? Where are the things and maybe the weak spots that we have where we're turning to empire and power of this world versus trusting in God and trusting in his ways? Because when God gives us a new heart, the whole point of that is for us to start seeing the world, behaving in the world, feeling, thinking, and moving forward in a very different way than we did before we knew Jesus. And so if we're not doing that, we have to ask the question, has that new heart ever been given? And so really the gospel's wrapped up in all of this, is that if we are not showing the signs on the outside of having followed Jesus and beginning to learn, not perfectly, but learning and transforming to think like he does, to see the world like he does, to see through his eyes, to love what he loves and despise what he despises, then we have to go back to the beginning and from this week and say, is that heart been renewed? What next week's writings are going to do is they're again going to hold up this mirror. We're going to talk about some things that could be a good diagnostic tool about where that heart is and where our heart is falling. So I want to encourage you to keep coming along, keep following along, like, share. Please comment on these things. I know not a lot of people comment, but I get a lot of messages and things in person, but make some of those online. It helps us with the algorithms. It does help get the word out there that we're trying to share. If you don't have the app, go out and get that. You can get us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, in the app. It's on Apple and Android, online on the web. We got so many different ways that you can get material that we're putting out. And we want to invite you to do that. We just want to thank you guys for coming along this journey with us. I hope you're finding it helpful. And I hope that you're finding this little daily walk that we're doing pouring into your soul in a very positive way. We thank you. Appreciate you guys, everybody here at the Crucibles Fire. We love you. We're praying for you, and see you next time. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.